Vietnam smothered a wave of anti-China protests on Sunday with a massive security clampdown.
You can see Chinese maritime militia vessel already moving to close the opening.
Vietnam has had enough of China's ambitions in the South China Sea, especially now that Beijing has yet again provoked Hanoi with a move that won't surprise you.
The Vietnam Prime Minister, in an exclusive interview to Times Now, has dared China. In a veiled threat, he says Vietnam will welcome Navy ships from India and other countries.
There is a country China never expected to fear, a country smaller, poorer, and once shattered by one of the longest wars of the 20th century. A country the world once saw as a symbol of destruction, not development. But today, when that same country is quietly becoming China's worst nightmare. Vietnam. For decades, Beijing assumed Vietnam would remain a quiet neighbor, focused only on rebuilding its roads, its cities, and its broken economy. A nation too busy recovering, too underdeveloped, and too dependent on Chinese trade to ever challenge China's power. But the world shifted. Global supply chains cracked. Companies began leaving China, and Vietnam saw its opportunity and ran with it. In just the last decade, Vietnam transformed faster than almost any country in Asia. It went from a low-income economy to one of the world's most attractive manufacturing hubs. Apple moved parts of its production to Vietnam. Samsung built massive factories. Intel, Nike, Adidas, Lego, and dozens of Western giants followed. Billions in foreign investment poured in. Vietnam's exports skyrocketed so fast that in industries like electronics, textiles, and furniture, it began rivaling China itself. Industrial zones expanded, ports upgraded, highways multiplied, and a young, ambitious workforce of nearly 100 million people powered the entire transformation. Vietnam didn't just grow, it became the new center of gravity for companies escaping China's rising costs, strict regulations, and geopolitical risks. Slowly, quietly, Vietnam became the manufacturing engine that China used to be. And for the first time, China is looking south and realizing that its biggest threat may not be America, but its fast-growing, fiercely independent neighbor it once underestimated. But economics is just the beginning. Vietnam sits at the heart of the South China Sea, one of the most valuable and most dangerous waterways on the planet, a region carrying trillions in global trade, rich with oil, gas, and strategic islands. China claims almost the entire South China Sea, a massive U-shaped line, the 9-dash line, that cuts across one of the world's busiest oceans. Beijing says all of it belongs to them. The islands, the reefs, the oil, the shipping routes, everything. But Vietnam refuses to accept this. And unlike many of China's neighbors, Vietnam doesn't just file complaints or give speeches. Vietnam pushes back. Over the last decade, while the world was distracted, Vietnam quietly transformed its coastline into a chain of fortified naval hubs. It upgraded old ports, built new naval bases, and placed radar stations along key islands. And it didn't stop there. Vietnam expanded its maritime militia, a shadow fleet of thousands of civilian fishing vessels. But these are not ordinary fishing boats. They are trained, coordinated, and prepared to confront Chinese ships head-on. They track movements, they block intrusions, they defend waters Vietnam considers its own. Then came the weapons. Vietnam bought advanced submarines from Russia, some of the most feared in Southeast Asia. It added coastal missile systems capable of striking ships hundreds of kilometers away. It acquired advanced drones, radar networks, and fighter aircraft from India, South Korea, Israel, and Europe. And at the same time, Vietnam built something far more powerful than weapons. It strengthened its relationship with the United States, a country determined to limit China's control of the region. It deepened ties with Japan, the strongest naval power in Asia besides China. And it signed new defense cooperation deals with Australia, the European Union, and India. Vietnam is doing all this because it understands something the world often forgets. Vietnam has defeated China before, not once, not twice, but multiple times across history. Chinese dynasties tried for centuries to conquer Vietnam, and every time, Vietnam pushed them back. In the 15th century, Vietnamese forces expelled the Ming dynasty's army, one of the largest and most powerful in Asia. In the 18th century, Vietnam crushed a Qing invasion with a lightning-fast counterattack. And in 1979, when China launched a massive invasion to teach Vietnam a lesson, Vietnam fought back so fiercely that China withdrew in just 29 days, suffering far heavier losses. Few countries in Asia have consistently forced China to retreat. Few countries have resisted Chinese influence for over 1,000 years. Almost no country has turned Chinese invasions into outright failures. But Vietnam has, and Beijing remembers every single one of those defeats. That history shapes how China views Vietnam today, not as a small country, not as an easy opponent, but as a stubborn, relentless rival that refuses to kneel and refuses to be controlled. But what truly terrifies China is this. The world's biggest supply chains are now looking at Vietnam as the next China. The United States sees Vietnam as a rising partner that can help counterbalance China's power in Asia. Japan and South Korea see Vietnam as the new foundation for their electronics and automotive industries. And Europe views Vietnam as a safer, more predictable manufacturing hub, far away from China's political risks. Slowly, quietly, Vietnam is becoming the center of an entirely new geopolitical triangle between the West, China, and Southeast Asia. And here's the twist. While China is dealing with slowing economic growth, a shrinking workforce, an aging population, and rising global suspicion, Vietnam is moving in the opposite direction. Vietnam is young. Vietnam is fast. Vietnam is opening up to the world at a speed almost no country can match. Its population is growing. Its education levels are rising. Its workforce is skilled, ambitious, and hungry for opportunity. Exactly what global companies want right now. Vietnam doesn't dream of leading Asia. It doesn't want a confrontation or a full-scale rivalry with China. But it wants one thing above everything else: freedom from Chinese control. And that single goal is reshaping Vietnam's entire strategy. How it trades, how it builds its economy, how it buys weapons, and which countries it chooses to trust. Vietnam is not trying to replace China, but it is making sure China can never dominate it again. China now sees a serious problem forming right on its doorstep. A country that is becoming richer, not because of China's help, but because of China's mistakes. A country building new alliances that directly reduce China's influence in Asia. A country physically blocking China's ambitions in the South China Sea. And a country that, throughout history, has done something almost no one else has done. It has defeated China more than once. This is why Vietnam is no longer just a neighbor. Vietnam is becoming a strategic threat, a nation positioned exactly where China does not want resistance. It is becoming an economic rival, attracting factories, investments, and supply chains that China is rapidly losing. It is becoming a military obstacle, a country that refuses to surrender its waters, its islands, or its sovereignty. And it is becoming a geopolitical wildcard, unpredictable, independent, and willing to partner with any power that protects its national interests. But here's the part that truly alarms Beijing. Vietnam isn't threatening China with weapons or speeches. Vietnam is threatening China with something far more powerful: success. A successful Vietnam sends a message to the world that you don't need China to grow, that you don't need China to manufacture, and that a smaller nation can stand up to a superpower and survive. This is why Vietnam is becoming something far more dangerous than a traditional enemy. Vietnam is becoming a model, an alternative path for Asia, a country proving that economic growth, global partnerships, and independence can exist without China. And that is why, today, Vietnam is slowly turning into China's worst nightmare.